Okay, everybody, can you hear me? Okay. Okay. Hi, everybody. What we're going to talk about today is, believe it or not, how the British musical theater people invaded the Broadway musical tradition. The American musical theater truly is an art form that was created and fostered and generated by our own creative ideals going back to the 20s and the World War I era. And it was a constant evolution. But the British had a very different approach to musical theater, and for the most part, was not truly well received by American audiences. In fact, British musicals, if they even tried to bring one across, never really did well. It takes until 1953 when that is a 19-year-old Julie Andrews, comes across with a musical called The Boyfriend, a spoof, a satire about the 1920s, about a bunch of girls who are in a boarding school and they are caught up in British manners and, typical satire of the time. With lots of ridiculous plot devices that were very typical of the 1920s musical. This musical caught everybody's imagination, and suddenly there seemed to be an opportunity to take the British sensibility and British sense of humor and perhaps move it to common tastes in the United States. The next most popular British theme musical was Peter Pan. Everybody knew Peter Pan, but it had been set to music by Leonard Bernstein in the early 1950s, but it never really gained popularity. However, the Mary Martin version, which was done on television, really demonstrated that the public seemed to have an interest or a thirst for a British piece that was commonly read in England, but not always part of United States culture. My Fair Lady truly is the first. When My Fair Lady was being written, it had a lot of challenges. And let's go back to the play Pygmalion. George Bernard Shaw writes a play about the suffragette movement in England in the 1912. He's writing about women seeking recognition in their culture, and it's a very British play focusing on class differences and how these class differences play out in the different strata of British society. Everyone by 1954-55 was trying to figure out how they might set Pygmalion to music. I mean, MGM, the movie studio, wanted to do it. Rodgers and Hammerstein tried to figure it out, and it didn't fit the formula. They couldn't figure out where was the central love story, where were their A character, the main character in the love story, who was the secondary love story. It just didn't fit. So they struggled and struggled and finally released their option to try and make My Fair Lady into a musical when MGM truly was focused on doing this. However, Alan J. Lerner, who would go back and forth to Hollywood and had a working relationship at MGM, heard what they were trying to do, and he goes with his partner Frederick Lowe, to the attorneys of the estate, and he says to them, "Don't make a decision on MGM just yet. Let me play with this for about 6 weeks and see if I can come up with something that will work." Now, again, Pygmalion was very British in its whole concept. The idea of women's role in the British society, someone trying to learn to speak proper English to raise their stature in British society, all of these things were very much part of a British kind of a culture. And the way people would look down on people just because of their accent and where it might have meant that they came from. How was this going to be conveyed to an American audience of sensibility? Well, they went to the 1937 Pygmalion movie with Wendy Hiller and Leslie Howard, and they saw there were things spoken about that happened off stage that clearly could be developed into musical numbers. For example, taking Eliza to tea became the Ascot Gavotte scene. Eliza Doolittle's father And his life suddenly became two musical numbers. And on it went. But then as they realized they were getting into production, they realized they had to have somewhere, somehow, that Eliza could get dressed to go to the ball. How were they actually going to show that scene, which is not actually seen in Pygmalion? Well, they had to create 4 minutes. So they had to write a musical number that could take place while other things happened backstage, getting into a dress, for example, getting into tuxedos, for example. And what they realized was who were they going to give a song to? Well, there's this minor character in Pygmalion, Freddie Eynsford Hill, that they realized might be the person that Eliza could be romantically involved with. And they wrote this song for him. And this was the first famous song from My Fair Lady, immortalized by Vic Damone. I have often walked down this street before, but the pavement always stayed beneath my feet before. All at once am I several stories high, knowing I'm on the street where you live. Are there lilac trees in the heart of town? Can you hear a lark in any other part of town? Does enchantment pour out of every door? No, it's just on the street where you live. And oh, the towering feeling, just to know somehow you are near. The overpowering feeling that any second you may suddenly appear. People stop and stare, they don't bother me, for there's nowhere else on earth that I would rather be. Let the time go by, I won't care if I can be here on the street where you live. That song really became the first big hit of My Fair Lady. Now, of course, who are they going to cast to portray these people? They wanted really very astute, well-trained British actors. The first person they went to was Noel Coward. He turned the part down. The next person they went to was Peter Sellers. He wasn't interested either. And they went down a long list of people to about the number 10 person on the list. They approached Rex Harrison. He was an Academy Award-winning actor. He had just been in a play called Bell, Book, and Candle, and they thought he would be ideal. Now, Rex Harrison was extremely temperamental, and after he signed on, he was petrified that he would embarrass himself singing on stage. They created a musical style for him called Singspiel, where the actor actually talks on a note that he then musicalizes without really singing. They then had to find someone to play Eliza Doolittle, and the first person they went to was actually Mary Martin. Her husband listened to the music and thought it was so hideous that he would not allow Mary Martin to sign on as Eliza Doolittle. Julie Andrews auditioned. She was 22 years old at this point in time, knocked him dead, so to speak, and the rest, of course, is history. Now, the next musical of British background that comes to the United States is based upon a Dickens novel, Oliver Twist. No one really imagined that Oliver would become a big success, and David Merrick, the producer who brought it from London, thought it really had some legs. But before he brought it to Broadway, he did something very unusual with it at the time. He toured the entire country, making sure that music from Oliver would go live on the radio. As Long as He Needs Me becomes a very popular piece in the early 1960s. And it was typical that if you ran into a ticket selling problem, you would go on to the Ed Sullivan Show to sell tickets. After the Kennedy assassination, there were many musicals that had a hard time selling, and Ed Sullivan was approached to have Oliver come on to a Sunday night show. Sure enough, pegging Oliver to another British phenomenon, it was the very first time the Beatles ever appeared on American television on the same night that Oliver was also presented on American television. So, two important phenomena of British culture are forever linked in our culture. But there's another beautiful song from Oliver beside As Long as He Needs Me, and it's this one. Where is love? Does it fall from skies above? Is it underneath the willow tree that I've been dreaming of? Where is she who I close my eyes to see? Will I ever know the sweet hello that's meant for only me? Who can say where she may hide? Must I travel far and wide till I am beside the someone who I can mean something to? Where is love? Where is Love from Oliver? Now, there were many other British opportunities to enchant us, not all of them successful, but Noel Coward wrote wonderful comedies of manners and British humor. And one of them was a story called Blithe Spirit, the story of a mystery writer. Mystery writer whose first wife died, and he's now remarried, and he wants to hold a seance to do research for a novel that he is about to write. He hires a medium to come conduct the seance, and she conjures up the first wife of this mystery writer. And this first wife misses him so much that she creates a plot he's going to be killed and be able to be with her in heaven. Well, the problem is he kills the second wife by mistake, and what happens next is the two of them haunt him forever after. Noel Coward does not translate well to musical theater because it's the manners and so forth, and the music is truly an interruption, but it was tried anyway. The next musical that came over was with a song and dance man based upon an early 1900s book written by H.G. Wells about a Cockney who inherits and has to fit in to British society. This is typical of the plot of British musicals, where a Cockney would inherit music and have to be accepted by the peerage around him. It ran for about 18 months, came to the United States, also was successful, and truthfully, we haven't seen it since. Another musical of the era, and again, most of the British musicals all tried to get songs onto the radio, which was typical of the time. David Merrick, again, the producer who was nicknamed the Abominable Showman because of his bad behavior with almost everything that he did and his publicity stunts, brings this small musical over, Stop the World, I Want to Get Off. Not a particularly memorable musical, except that everybody remembers the title. And it also had music in it that everybody knew. Gonna Build a Mountain, Once in a Lifetime, and of course, this one. What kind of fool am I who never fell in love? It seems that I'm the only one that I have been thinking of. What kind of man is this? An empty shell, a lonely cell in which an empty heart must dwell. What kind of lips are these that lied with every kiss, that whispered empty words of love, that left me alone like this? Why can't I fall in love like any other man? And maybe then I'll know what kind of fool I am. From Stop the World, I Want to Get Off. Of course, immortalized by Sammy Davis and many, many, many other pop singers who really found that song to be such an important part of the British American songbook. The next musical that was very much like it was Roar the Grease Paint, and that too got songs onto the radio again, written by Anthony Newley. Just a few years later, they thought was, well, if one musical based upon Dickens could be successful, why not another? The idea of Pickwick Papers being turned into a musical, it ran forever in London. It ran barely 2 months in the United States. There was a young composer who had just graduated from music school. He was working on all kinds of projects, and he writes a rock opera about the life of Jesus. The Catholic Church, totally offended by the portrayal of Jesus as a rock star kind of a scenario, but Jesus Christ Superstar is the first of the rock musicals that are totally sung through almost as if they were concerts, and has tremendously received a strong following ever since. Now, the next musical that comes along from Britain takes about 8 years. What's happened in the meantime is Broadway musicals in the 70s have changed tremendously. Storylines have gone away. A chorus line was now the reigning champion on Broadway, the musical without a plot, just watching people share their thoughts about their lives and what they were doing. And along comes the story about a hideous dictator and his wife in Argentina, Juan and Eva Perón, and how she manipulates her life, rising through power circles to ultimately become First Lady, and in her hopes, the first Vice President of Argentina. Truly a despicable character, a hideous human being, and a totally sung through piece, which gave everybody it was an opera sung through in rock tempi. It created a role for Patti LuPone that launches her career, and she then suddenly becomes a toast of Broadway because of her role as Eva Perón. It also launches the career of Mandy Patinkin, and Tim Rice and Andrew Lloyd Webber are now the team that seems to be creating the most exciting Broadway work. However, not to be outdone, in the meantime, there was another musical that, although based upon written by an American composer, is really not only just that, but something of horror and true fear. The musical is, of course, my personal favorite. It's Sweeney Todd. The story of a man who was abused by the justice system of England in the 1840s, sent off to Australia. He comes back 15 years later to look for his wife, look for his daughter. And what happens in the meantime is he is recognized by a woman who has now created a bake shop where his tonsorial parlor used to be. She doesn't quite come clean with him, telling him what is really been going on. She gives him enough information to help him seek revenge. And there are a couple of murders that take place, and we all know if you kill somebody, you have to figure out what you're going to do with the body. Things were very difficult, so she comes up with the idea that they should cook people into meat pies. And of course, it unravels from there. Stephen Sondheim, who wrote the piece, always thought it would be very exciting to scare an audience to death while they were hearing beautiful music. And Sweeney Todd truly did that. And this particular role earned Angela Lansbury her fourth Tony Award, as did Len Cariou as well. Sweeney Todd is considered to be Stephen Sondheim's greatest masterpiece, based upon a British play. So once again, we're learning that British influence on the American musical theater is again truly profound and very, very important. In 1982, the idea of taking T.S. Eliot's collection of poems, An Old Opossum's Tales, I believe is the title, was on everybody's mind. These were very popular poems. People in Britain, a house cat is one of the number one things that many people actually own. And it is a very popular pet. And these poems all had cats who had different kinds of personalities and lives that were just seemingly important to be musicalized. It was the ultimate concept musical in that it had no plot at all. It was a collection of cats performing, and no one quite knew for what purpose. And they were trying to figure out, how do we tie this story together? Well, one of the complications of this was that T.S. Eliot's estate said you could not use the poems to be musicalized unless you used every single one of them. Within that, they couldn't figure out how to do it. So Cameron McIntosh and Trevor Nunn were trying to figure out how to tie this thing together when they were going through the notes that T.S. Eliot had left behind, the files of scribblings that went into his journals, and they found a couplet. And basically, what the couplet said was, midnight, not a sound from the pavement. Has the moon lost her memory? Is she smiling alone? And they looked at that and they thought, maybe there's the key. Maybe what we do is we create a character who's fallen from grace, who is not well liked by her peers in the community, who has maybe interfered with people's lives in a negative way. And let's shape the whole evening along the fact that cats have 9 lives, and we're looking for one to be chosen to go to her next life. Well, they do that, and they write a song based upon that lyric, which gives the show Cats its definition. When Cats opened in London, the reviews were so negative that they couldn't even figure out how to promote it. So they advertised it as Cats now and forever. And it caught on with audiences without the critical acclaim. Knowing that this was a risk, bringing it to the United States, Andrew Lloyd Webber knows that if they can get the song Memory onto the US pop charts, it will propel the interest in the musical. He goes to Barbara Streisand and asks her if she would be interested in recording the song. She loved it. And of course, we all know she did that. And the song Memory was on the pop charts 6 months prior to it ever opening in New York. When it opened in New York, one of the reviews said it was like taking a cat nap. You wanted to just curl up and sleep through most of it. However, the reviews really had no impact. It was a dazzling production, and it ran for 13 years with the eyes of that cat on every piece of merchandise you could possibly find. Now, the song Memory is a little difficult. It's written in 2.5 octaves. It jumps all over the place. It's not disciplined writing in that the measure, the time signature for a singer, it tells you how many beats are in a measure and which note gets the beat. It changes every other measure to accommodate the lyric that was written by Trevor Nunn and Cameron McIntosh. And of course, this is the song. Midnight, not a sound from the pavement. Has the moon lost her memory? She is smiling alone. In the lamplight, the withered leaves collect at my feet, and the wind begins to moan. Memory, all alone in the moonlight, I can smile at the old days. I was beautiful then. I remember the time I knew what happiness was. Let the memory live again. Every street lamp seems to beat a fatalistic warning. Someone mutters and the street lamp gutters, and soon it will be morning. Daylight, I must wait for the sunrise. I must think of a new life, and I mustn't give in. When the dawn comes, tonight will be a memory too, and a new day will begin. Burnt out ends of smoky days, the stale cold smell of morning. The street lamp dies, another night is over, another day is dawning. Touch me, it's so easy to leave me all alone with the memory of my days in the sun. If you touch me, you'll understand what happiness is. Look, a new day has begun. Cats. The new movie, by the way, was considered so horrible they pulled it out of the movie theaters a week after it opened. Odd. After Cats, they thought Starlight Express, if we could have cats telling stories, why not have train cars be almost the same identical story? And everybody was on roller skates. In England, it ran 8 years. Here in the States, it ran about 18 months, never to be seen again. Me and My Girl, a British musical from 1937 that had never played in the United States. It comes over in 1985, and what was so amazing about it is it was the typical British story. A Cockney who inherits a lot of money, and they're trying to figure out how he's going to fit in to society. It caught everybody's imagination. People enjoyed it thoroughly. But now what was happening with the British musical was that they were big. They had large set pieces. They had enormous casts, and they were almost sung through as if they were operas. Les Miserables was originally just a concept album. It was not necessarily ever thought of to be staged as a musical, but yet it was. And Les Mis opened with a great deal of fervor, people just clamoring to see it because it was so beautifully told, and it just appealed to everybody with its romance, its sweep, and the way that a story is told. Les Mis, of course, ran forever. It ran for about 14 years. It's made many people's almost perfectly favorite musical. And there's a beautiful moment in the second act when Jean Valjean is trying to save the life of his ward's suitor. And the fact that he has a checkered background could be damaging to his ward. So he wants to save this girl's future and save the life of this young man. And the young man ultimately doesn't really know who saved him. But here's the beautiful prayer that the character Jean Valjean sings. God on high, hear my prayer. In my need, you have always been there. He is young, he's afraid. Let him rest, heaven blessed. Bring him home, bring him home, bring him home. He's like the son I might have known if God had granted me a son. The summers die one by one, how soon they fly on, and I am old and will be gone. Bring him peace, bring him joy. He is young, he is only a boy. You can take, you can give. Let him be, let him live. If I die, let me die. Let him live. him home. Bring him home. Bring him home. Truly a gorgeous song. Well, still running pretty much if Broadway were open. Uh, 33 years, The Phantom of the Opera has been running, directed by Hal Prince, Andrew Lloyd Webber. Again, taking opera, pop music, bringing it all together with this most romantic of stories, this deformed man who is enchanted by the musical voice of a young woman, creating havoc all around her. Um, when it was new, it was captivating. It's maybe the most famous musical ever written, and the fact that it is still playing after 33 years is saying something tremendous about the piece. There were many other British musicals. There was Chess that never really did well, has a cult following. Aspects of Love by Andrew Lloyd Webber, and Sunset Boulevard. Sunset Boulevard and Miss Saigon, all of them in their own right, causing all kinds of interest. Miss Saigon, the story of the fall of Saigon with the American troops, and how it creating its own controversy that changed the way Broadway plays would be cast forever because Miss Saigon was not using people of the natural origin of the parts. They were using Caucasians to play Asian people, and this again has never been done since that time. And then there was the story of Kiss of the Spider Woman, and Sunset Boulevard. The British didn't know the movie Sunset Boulevard the way Americans did, but Andrew Lloyd Webber wanted to set it to music in opera form, originally casting Patti LuPone in London as Norma Desmond. When he decided to do it in Hollywood, before bringing it to Broadway, he wanted a Hollywood star. So he got Glenn Close to portray Norma Desmond. Her reviews so phenomenal that he tossed Patti LuPone aside at great cost to then put Glenn Close on Broadway. Many said to have seen Glenn Close portray Norma Desmond was one of the greatest portrayals on the musical stage in the 20th century. Well, I hope this was fun. I'm going to try to see you all soon again, and I look forward to it. I hope everybody has a good week. Stay well, and